Welcome to my video essay. View freely and of your own will. I'm Kyle, and for this special episode of Kyle's Fictions, my first done on my own since doing the first two as college projects, I'm going to be talking not just about the life lessons I learned from the pieces of fiction concerned, but from the circumstances related to how I first came to read them. It's a story from my high school days, which, as I'm confident everyone who's gone to high school will agree, are a time where we learn a few lessons the hard way. The lesson I learned is, arguably, that you should be careful what time and reason you choose to read a new story. The stories I read were two very famous pieces of Victorian fiction I chose for my grade 12 English comparative novel essay. Although I did enjoy reading and analyzing stories, and did well in English, I wrongly assumed, before reading these particular stories, that comparing them would be a simple job for me. The resulting difficult task that I obsessed over was made worse by my suffering from anxiety at the time. Considering these things, I decided to tell this story as a warning to others who study stories, or perhaps other things academically, to avoid the mistakes I made. What is more, since we're close to Halloween, in that spirit I've decided to post my video because the two said pieces of Victorian fiction are the famous horror novels, Dracula and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with these particular two stories, but for those who aren't or could use a refresher, here's a bit of background. Dracula was first published in 1897 by Irish-born author Bram Stoker. It tells the story of a group of friends from Victorian London who make the horrifying discovery that Transylvanian Count Dracula is a centuries-old vampire. They also learn that he plans, through use of his evil and holy powers, to make the citizens of England into vampires for him to rule over. Upon this discovery, the friends, led by scientist Dr. Van Helsing, embark on a quest to thwart and destroy Dracula. It is believed that Bram Stoker's intense interest in vampires and horror led him to write Dracula, inspired in his childhood when he spent 7 years sick in bed while his mother entertained him with ghost stories. Another possible inspiration for the character of Dracula is the actor Henry Irving, whom Stoker admired and was manager for 27 years. Since Stoker's death in 1912 at age 65, Dracula has become immortalized through hundreds of plays and films, although few of them are truly faithful to the original. The novel also continues to inspire other vampire-based fiction in all genres to this day. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was first published in 1886 by Scottish-born author Robert Louis Stevenson. Set in Victorian London, it tells the story of lawyer Gabriel John Utterson, as he investigates the apparent connection between his friend and client, Dr. Henry Jekyll, and a strange, violent man called Edward Hyde. The investigation comes to its shocking conclusion one night when Utterson finds Hyde dead in Jekyll's laboratory and wearing Jekyll's clothes. He subsequently discovers, through a letter left by Jekyll, that he and Hyde were in fact the same person, Hyde being the repressed dark side of Jekyll's personality, released through a potion Jekyll discovered. For a time, Jekyll reveled in the freedom of becoming Hyde, who had no moral restraint, but eventually realized that the changes were becoming uncontrollable. Although he attempted to stop, Jekyll eventually concluded he would soon become Hyde permanently, leading him to write his letter to Utterson. This implies that Hyde committed suicide upon emerging after, apparently to avoid facing justice for his violent crimes. It has been said that author Robert Louis Stevenson felt constrained by the strict social norms of the Victorian era he lived in. This can be seen arguably as part of his inspiration for writing Jekyll and Hyde, as well as several of his other works, which demonstrate a sharp tension between upstanding duty and reckless abandon. Jekyll and Hyde remains Stevenson's most famous novel, in fact becoming so quickly popular after initial publication that it began being performed on stage 1 year later. Within the following century and 3 decades, the story has seen many stage, radio, and TV adaptations, as well as over 100 in film. It has also seen countless pop culture references and inspirations, one of which is Marvel Comics' The Incredible Hulk. In the years since my high school days, despite how things turned out for my English essay, I've come to think that perhaps it isn't so far-fetched to compare Dracula and Jekyll and Hyde academically. There are some parallels between the two novels. They are both set in the Victorian era, with Victorian England playing a role. They both contain metaphysical themes, but also themes of reasoning and science. They both have characters dedicated to using reason to solve problems, as was the social norm of their time. And they both involve an element that releases repressed dark emotions, in Dracula's vampiric powers and Dr. Jekyll's potion. There are key differences between the novels too, though. Bram Stoker wrote the Dracula character as the monstrous embodiment of the repressed animalistic emotions that must be overcome for society to stay safe. Robert Louis Stevenson arguably portrayed in Jekyll and Hyde the idea that animalistic emotions will inherently show themselves if society restricts them too much. Nevertheless, it is believed that the ghostly double infecting the soul was a popular fictional subject for late 19th century writers, and is arguably explored in both stories as it battles Victorian-era reason and morality. Count Dracula battles the group of righteous Victorians led by Dr. Van Helsing, while Dr. Jekyll battles the temptations of his repressed side, manifested in Mr. Hyde. As George Stade says in his introduction to my copy of Dracula, Van Helsing is to Dracula as Dr. Jekyll is to Mr. Hyde, as Victor Frankenstein is to his monster, as Holmes is to Moriarty, as Freud's ego is to his id. I may understand all these things better now, but that doesn't mean I did in high school. I believe now that the novels, being of the Victorian era and particularly more complex than what I was used to reading, were not the wisest choice for my English essay. In relation to why I chose the novels for the assignment, I don't know. Maybe I thought reading famous, acclaimed novels would make it easier for me to get a good mark, or maybe I was genuinely interested in learning more about the novels themselves. Either way, I remember I did want to read Dracula and Jekyll and Hyde for myself sometime, and thought doing it for the essay would make the work fun. Although I was interested in reading these famous stories, I also thought, since they were complex and layered literature, and I might add the first such literature I had studied on my own for an English essay, that I should analyze any and every word in them so I didn't miss any important points. With this in mind, when I chose to read Dracula first, since it was a much longer novel, I put in a sticky note to mark everything from paragraphs to single words that I thought could have meaning. Eventually this led to my copy being so stuffed with sticky notes that it became pretty much impossible to identify the most important points for my argument. Although I realized this before reading Jekyll and Hyde, it was too late by then for me to reread Dracula, much less choose new novels to read. And I actually still have all the sticky notes in my copy of Dracula to show you here. I haven't removed any since I did the English essay. Look at this. Take a careful look. Oh yes. Every sticky note I had is still here. Yep. It takes a special kind of obsessiveness to analyze something this much. This was actually also my reason for doing this video essay. When I came across my copy of Dracula a while back while sorting through some of my old books, I considered removing all the sticky notes so I could have it as a normal book to read. But then I thought, you know, I should share this story before I do that. It might even save some I share it with from making the same mistakes I made related to it. Also, if any of you watching this think you have a story where you studied something as obsessively as this, I'd be interested to hear it. Feel free to remark on it in the comments section below, along with your opinions on my video. Now, to finish my story, since I didn't have time to choose new novels for my assignment, hence started the feverish and stressful task of writing my essay with what I'd started. The work wasn't made any easier by how complex and varied I found the themes in the novels. Overall, it was a very unpleasant experience, one that I've given careful thought since to not repeating. The result was a rather confused and not so good essay. Final grade, 64%. A bit better than what I remember getting, actually. In conclusion, I have wondered if my English essay and maybe other school assignments I've done didn't turn out so well because of peer and/or personal pressure I felt to produce good, serious assignments. Or maybe, like Dracula and Jekyll and Hyde's authors and all those academics before me, I was just fascinated by tales of the dark side of the rule-abiding world I lived in. The main reason I think I had difficulty comparing the novels in the essay, though, was because of a level of complexity in their writing that I wasn't used to. Personally, I still think I had a good deal to learn about the subtleties of essay writing for such stories. Considering that, the advice I'd like to give is, when you choose novels to run by your teacher for a comparative essay, choose novels you know you'll easily have fun reading, as well as studying for your essay argument. If you don't feel you'll easily have fun doing either of those things for a novel you've chosen, don't use it. Consider also choosing novels that you are very familiar with and understand well enough to be able to comment on from memory. I feel these approaches can be applied to other study or research projects as well, whether in school or otherwise. That's my story on how I first came to read Dracula and Jekyll and Hyde. On a final note, as unpleasant as the related experience may have been, I still very much enjoy stories for the new ideas they can provide. In relation to the two novels I talked about in this video, one Dracula-related novel I learned about some time ago is one I definitely recommend for readers who want an interesting such read. It is called Dracula the Undead, and was written to be the official sequel to Bram Stoker's original novel. It was penned by Dacre Stoker, Bram's great-grandnephew, and Ian Holt. Although I haven't personally read my copy yet, I'm very much intrigued to find out where its story goes. Or, if you're more interested in a lighter vampire tale, a story I have read is Bunnicula, the first of many very funny novels by James Howe. It tells of an American family who return home from the movies one stormy night with a mysterious new pet rabbit. The white and black rabbit has several unusual qualities, as observed by the family's other pets, Harold the dog, the story's narrator, and Chester the cat. Among these is the habit of being active only at night and sucking the juice out of the family's vegetables. That concludes my video essay. Hope you found it interesting and insightful, and that it gives you new thoughts on the fiction you're a fan of. Have a safe, sustainable, and happy Halloween.